Is there really any genre more contentious than that of horror? The rational or irrational fears of one are shrugged off by the next. You can end up with clowns that are terrifying to some people, just entertainment to others. Spiders are panic or pet. Planes, they're efficient travel or they're just death tubes in the sky. You end up with a journey to one's innermost fears that's a personal road laid with the bricks of memories gone. So what happens then when you try to walk the road of another? Does it work? Does it feel like a walk in the park? Or do you instead feel isolated and alone in the dark?
This is a big place. Maybe they're on the other side of the house.
Stay here. I'll have a look.
I was 6 years old when the original Alone in the Dark came out. I'm far too young to play video games and actually be able to form opinions on them at that age. I was more busy watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoons and playing with Micro Machines and Mighty Max. I had brief rendezvous with horror games throughout my teenage years. Either alone or while at a friend's house, I was introduced to the usual suspects of Resident Evil and Silent Hill. I even had an encounter with Realms of the Haunting, even though I had to then try and figure out what game it was and check that we owned it. And my father has no memory of ever buying it, owning it, or even existing in our house. I know I've played it, and so that insanity is staying with me until this day. It's at this point, I was then going to start talking about how in the past 10 years, we've had great horror games with updated ideas. And then I realized that while researching this, Amnesia: The Dark Descent came out in 2010. And time makes a mockery of us all when it comes to things like that. So how about we skip all the feeling old parts and we just discuss some video games? Yeah? Sound cool? Cool. So it's 2024 and we are in a renaissance, baby, when it comes to remakes and remasters. They are getting more attention here and there, and we're ending up seeing things like Resident Evil and Silent Hill both either having brought out or bringing out stuff for us to play. So why not add Alone in the Dark to that mix? Well, HQ Nordic and Pieces Interactive definitely think we should have it. They're bringing us a reimagining of Alone in the Dark that was a trendsetter. I remember seeing an interview somewhere that if it wasn't for Alone in the Dark, Resident Evil wouldn't be the game it is today. So what are we going to be doing this time around then? Well, in 1930s New Orleans, Alone in the Dark sees us joining Emily Hartwood, played by Jodie Comer, and Edward Carnby, played by David Harbour, on a journey to Derceto Manor and beyond. Emily arrives at Derceto Manor looking for her uncle, Jeremy, and she feels unsafe at the idea of going alone, so decides to hire Edward Carnby to keep her safe. You know, up until the end of the initial cutscene where they split up because they've got to split up. There's a good number of nods towards the original story. There's Easter eggs throughout, and, you know, it then diverts into new ideas and everything goes in an interesting manner. And let's pause for a moment, because I don't want to get into too much of this part. I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to limit my footage to earlier parts of the game. I'm not going to discuss what happens in the story. I don't want to spoil anything that's going on there, as it's a really story-heavy game. Story is, yeah, fine. Let's get it out of the way. It's over there. If you want a spoiler-heavy review, I'm sure they exist, and you can find them easy enough. But what I'm going to focus on here is that I want to focus on the individual parts that build up a horror game and how they stack up, how Alone in the Dark uses them, how it compares to older games, and sadly, we'll also discuss why it falls short of being a survival horror game. So, survival horror. It doesn't have one key component that makes it work. It's cake. Different ingredients in different proportions can be successful. Sound, atmosphere, setting, weapon management, enemy design, jump scares, tension building, tension release. There's so much more going into that bowl in differing amounts, and I guarantee you someone in the comments is going to complain at what my opinion of survival horror is compared to theirs, which just solidifies this fact even more. I welcome it. Bring it on. Let's see it. So, when I was younger, I remember playing Resident Evil Code Veronica X. Can't remember much about it, but I do remember that there's a part early in the game where you're walking around outside near some buildings, and then the camera cuts. It's underneath some stairs. It's watching you, and then you realize that something is watching you, and then it cuts back. and you're in control again. And this will happen several times over the next few minutes of that game. And then, spoilers for a 24-year-old game, I guess, it's revealed that you're being stalked by a dog. It's near the beginning, the enemy options that have been thrown at you are pretty minimal. Yet in those few minutes that I'm being stalked, my mind was racing because of an overactive imagination, just coming up with idea after idea of what was waiting for me under that building, and how I wasn't going to be able to handle it, it was going to beat me, and I was going to die. And that fear of the unknown or the unseen can be much worse than a dog. Can't tell you anything else about Code Veronica X. Nothing really. If I drain, I can maybe think about the fact that the opening cutscene has someone jumping out of a really tall building, but that could be Code Veronica X, or that could be one of the movies. I'm not really sure. The game has faded to memory over decades, but you know what didn't fade? A dog encounter. It stuck with me through time. You know what else stuck with me through time? The intro to Resident Evil 2. The eye scene in all of its infamy from Dead Space. There's a lift shaft filled with blood in Fear. Or one that actually made me wake someone up was a corpse stuffed in a locker in Condemned. Each moment is a different type of fear. Each moment is either tension or jump scare or something in between. Survival horror games know how to utilize tension. They're going to use it to play you like a fiddle, and that's what makes them great. Alien Isolation stresses me out the most when I can't see what's hunting me. The motion tracker gives me fundamental anxiety on a level that cowering in a locker, while I can hear a xenomorph walking around outside, doesn't manage to recreate. Fear hits you out as a literal super soldier. It gives you so many guns at your disposal, yet a dark corridor with no enemies can make me hesitate. Or you can end up in a moment where a little girl walking towards you causes you to cack yourself. You flip those situations around, they don't work. The tone would be wrong for the situation involved, and that's the first hurdle that Alone in the Dark stumbles at. Fully utilizing its setting is something the game doesn't do well. The aesthetic and the setting is lovely. Derceto and the 1930s New Orleans going on, the mansion and surrounding environments you explore, the interesting set pieces. There are small details helping to bring all of that to life. Empty drinks glasses on tables or playing cards scattered around give a feeling that you've missed whoever was here just moments. It's unsettling. There's noise off in the distance or just off camera that helps to elevate that. The lighting also tries to build tension for you by having enemies off in the distance silhouetted in shadow. And that's a great trope. That's fantastic. You utilizing light to enhance the unknown or to build suspense of shadowed corners and what is going on. All of that tension and all of that set dressing for Alone in the Dark is then unfortunately washed away by an overabundance of ammo and healing items, and it is then combined with a lacking stealth system and a character that doesn't seem to fully be understanding what's going on. You end up with less of a survival horror game and more of a detective game with horror vibes. During my playthroughs as Emily and Edward, I didn't have to sneak, I didn't have to hide from a single enemy. Neither did I really have to be concerned for ammo, as there's a hefty amount scattered around, and there's also melee weapons if you choose that you just want to flail wildly at an enemy, which can just remove all tension. And then closer to the end of the game, ammo will randomly dry up. And even when it did, I still found myself mostly full on the harder hitting weapons that I had if I really needed them. It went from giving me everything I needed to taking it away, but not realizing that because it had already given me everything I needed, I was good. And it's that lack of tension that stops Alone in the Dark from really reaching the heights of other survival horror games. There are several ways to create that feeling in survival horror. You can do Resident Evil and restrict ammo, making every combat situation a choice. Do you use those scarce resources? Do you risk delayed failure for immediate success? You can weigh that up every time you encounter a licker, and it's a case of, well, do I have the resources at this point to take it on? And if I do take it on, what state is it then leaving me in? It's an option to scale up enemy damage, or turn every fight into a mini boss of precision and stress about getting hit. You can also do the radius method and go for more stealth elements like Last of Us did, which humbled me a few times by making me think, I have this under control, just have one enemy to deal with. And then everything goes out the window when you realize that that's not what's going on. And there are many more enemies here than you thought, and you have to reassess the situation. For me, all of those elements and all of those situations build on one key idea: hesitation. They want you to hesitate and figure out whether or not this enemy is a threat to you. Whatever causes it can be unique for the game involved, but seeing an enemy walk around a corner should elicit a response. Alone in the Dark falls short on this, not only mechanically, but as I mentioned earlier, character-wise as well. Edward and Emily never really seem scared of the situations they're being put in. They don't hide, there's no panicked breathing, they shrug it off, which means that you end up shrugging it off. If it's another Tuesday for them, why should you be worried? If they've got it under control, then you've got it under control. It's all good, right? Unfortunately though, this disconnect from the protagonists is pervasive throughout the game. No better example can be given in this than the intro cutscene, which has Emily portrayed in a way that to me made her feel skeptical about Jeremy's issues and what was going on. She discusses a letter with Edward and that mental illness runs in the family and that there's depression going on and it's all in his head. Yet when things start getting spooky, as you know they are wont to do in a horror game, all of that skepticism melts away instantly, and she's on board with it. Edward too has this happen, but at least for him, the portrayal borders more on intrigue and confusion. And that's nothing against either Jodie or David. Like they're great voice actors, and they bring the characters to life. But it's a missed opportunity that is shown in situations like the first enemy in the game. Which, the first enemy in the game, a first reveal should always be something in my mind. Like, everyone remembers the first moment you see the Xenomorph in Alien Isolation, or the first moment you see Alma in Fear, or the zombies that you encounter at the beginning of Resident Evil. They should all be jarring. They should make you flinch, or make the main character pause, hesitate for a moment, as something is different, and they don't know what's going on. All you get in this is the main character going, and gasping. That's it. No comment, no panic, no hiding, no fear, no nothing. It is an enemy, and that's it. And you deal with it, and then they just move on. And if the character is unfazed by it, then why should you be? That's a massive core problem to me. It means that horror can be here, but that survival is somewhere else, and it might catch up at some point. There are some good ideas here, but it feels like Alone in the Dark didn't really understand the assignment. It's too busy focusing on the past and ensuring those references and Easter eggs to the previous game were in place. It ends up then neglecting to add the undertones needed to create the right vibe for that setting. Yeah, sure, it's all well and good that you can find a copy of the original Alone in the Dark, but like, how does that actually give me anything extra in the game? The 1930s New Orleans vibe has so much potential for adding creep factor and unease that it's just a little bit upsetting to see it neglected here. And then you take that vibe and you combine it with the idea of this looming mansion turned air quotes mental hospital, and that should be winning before you even add in concepts like Lovecraftian horror or other ideas going on. You could have situations like tight corridors, rain and fog rolling in from the bayou. A storm outside slams the shutter windows. There's howling wind going through the gaps in the wooden walls. And then that's even before you touch on other areas or locales that you could go to in the game. You'll be walking around and just things are unsettling to you. Just from a sound point of view, there's corridors that are uneasy in Resident Evil where there is nothing going on, simply because of the sound at play that makes you think something is going to happen when it doesn't. Sound is key and important. And it should be said though that the music in Alone in the Dark is the standout winner here. I'm going to butcher this name, but composer Ernie Berger Zoeger has done a masterful job of creating a soundtrack that understood what the assignment here was and went for the A grade. You end up with a mixture of tension-raising tracks and slow jazz that would fit right at home in a 1930s noir detective movie. You do everything with that music to help set the scene, and there is nothing more enjoyable than exploring dark New Orleans alleyways while a saxophone plays in the background. It sets that great gumshoe style investigation element that you know that something happened here, but you're not sure what, and you're trying to figure it out. And all of that combines then to make the idea of a horror game that kind of hopes up, and you're able to see it. The theme and the setting, they create a consistent horror vibe throughout the story, but the tension and stakes are missing on the side of survival in survival horror to truly bring everything together. You end up in a situation where, yes, there's something spooky going on, but I can handle it. It's a Tuesday, and I'm not really worried about it either devouring my sanity or eviscerating me in an alleyway. And those elements aren't helped by some technical issues either. Throughout the game, there are stutters and hitches, which, regardless of whether I lowered the FPS cap or not, really got in the way. And strangely, they weren't so much during combat as they were just walking around. And then on top of that, you end up having sound glitches that really break tension when the balancing is off, and you're either going to get deafened out of nowhere, or it's going to fade away into a quietness that you can't hear. Random noises just cut out sometimes as well. There was a moment where I had to restart my game because I wasn't sure if a half-second sound bite that kept playing was intended or unintentional bug. And it was really confusing, and it didn't help anything at all. And then you can stack on top of this a problem for me personally, which is an accessibility issue. And this one is a odd one that may or may not bother you. So there's a clue system in the game. It's designed to assist you on your journey, help give you combination numbers, help you solve puzzles, and point you in the right directions. And you can listen to these clues with great voice acting that adds another layer to the game. And they have written text on one side while someone reads it out. The problem is that the text that is shown does not match up one-to-one with the voice that is being played over it. What I mean by that is, on some of them, the text stops and the voice keeps going and then tells you more information beyond what is written down. And that means that from a gameplay perspective, you end up with a kind of, oh, there's an Easter egg here. There's something extra for me to listen to. And from an accessibility point of view, you end up with a situation where if you're playing at night and you've got the sound off, or if you're hard of hearing, or if you're using subtitles, those things aren't there. They're invisible to you. You miss out on little bits of lore that help build everything up. So where does that leave us then? At the end of this, Alone in the Dark is a horror strike-through survival game for me. It never truly manages to instill any level of tension or concern in the player about death or stakes, and nor does it ever really manage to reach the levels of more recent remakes like Resident Evil or Dead Space. It sits closely near games for me like Sunken City and Call of Cthulhu, rather than Amnesia or Layers of Fear. The tension isn't there, and you're playing in a horror school, but you're never really feeling like you're out of your depth. There's neat ideas going on, there's Lovecraftian ideas on display, but ultimately, you're in the shallow end and you're fine. It means that when it's all said and done, you end up in a situation where you don't really feel so much alone in the dark as you do accompanied by a flashlight and a shotgun.